Trains in Japan are a religion. So much so that there's even specific subcategories for different train lovers. For example, there's Toritestsu. Tori means taking pictures. Tetsu means railway, so for example somebody who loves taking pictures of railways. There is also Noritetsu, somebody who loves taking trains. There's Ekitetsu, somebody who is an expert on train station, and there's even some really obscure ones like Onkyoutetsu, which is somebody who records the different sounds around train station and around trains. In fact, we actually saw somebody do that on our trip in Hokkaido, where somebody just taped a tape recorder to the top of the train to record the female announcement. But even if you're not crazy enough to stick your iPhone to the top of a train to record an announcement, I am sure that you would appreciate a scenic train ride or two.
Oh yeah!
Well, that's awesome, because in today's video I'm going to count on my 5 favorite train rides across Japan. Alright, let's get on the train. Choo choo! This train has been running for almost 120 years, starting first in 1902, and it connects Fujisawa Station with Kamakura Station on the Shonan coast in Kanagawa Prefecture, passing along Enoshima, which is why it has this name. Both Enoshima and Kamakura are very popular day trips from Tokyo, especially in summer when there's a lot of skanky Japanese dudes flexing on girls, and also some people swimming. What makes this specific train ride so scenic is the fact that the train is riding right along the ocean for a lot of portions of it, and some other portions it just runs really narrowly through the city, which is also an interesting sight to see. But the main portions are certainly where it just rides right next to the open ocean, which is very scenic, very beautiful. The tip for this train is to stand, not to sit, because the seats are not facing the ocean. And if you stand and you go from Fujisawa to Kamakura, I would recommend standing on the right hand side, so you can see the ocean, and in the opposite direction I would recommend standing on the left hand side. The main portion where the ocean kind of opens is a few stops away from Enoshima Station, and it runs roughly just before Kamakura Station. Along the way, which takes around 33 minutes overall, there are a few stops worth getting off. One is, for example, Kamakura Kokomae Station. This is a very famous kind of railway cross and has been used in the slam dunk opening, anime opening. That's why it's very popular. During normal times you will see a lot of tourists there taking pictures. And then a few stops further, if you go to Shichirigahama, this is a very iconic spot because you get a really great view out towards Enoshima and then Mount Fuji. This is a very classic photo spot, classic viewpoint. Now again, with Mount Fuji, you want to go in winter months because in summer, there's a very low chance that you will actually be able to see it. And then of course Kamakura with its many temples and its really interesting shopping street, also a stop worth getting off, and also Enoshima obviously, which is this really interesting peninsula which has a lot of nature surprisingly, and also a museum and some other stuff worth checking out. If you plan on taking this train, I would recommend getting the Nori-Ori-kun ticket. This one costs around 650 yen, $6.50 or something, and it allows you to get off and on as many times as you want in one day. So if you're planning on checking out a lot of different stations, this one is definitely recommended because it saves you some sweet tosh, which is always nice. We are continuing our railway trip to the west of Tokyo, this time to Shizuoka Prefecture, to the slightly scary Ogawa Railway. This train actually has 2 rides that connect to each other. One is the Ogawa main line. This one features commemorative steam locomotives, and some of them are actually shaped like Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas the Tank Engine, no, Thomas the Engine. That's what I wanted to say. But yeah, those are special trains, but you can also just take the normal train if you want. It costs a little bit less. And then it continues to the Ogawa Line, which is the only rec railway in Japan, which I had to look up myself, which is apparently a steep grade railway with a toothed rec rail, according to Wikipedia at least. But basically it's just a really tiny rec railway. It's also the slightly more scary one of those two because it just runs along very steep cliffs falling off into deep ravines, and also just has this kind of small narrow rec railway that it runs on. It's a little bit scary, but it's certainly an interesting experience. The reason why you want to get on this train, besides the really beautiful views out towards the valleys and also Shizuoka's famous green tea fields, is one particular station that is a little bit hard to pronounce, Okuoi Kojo Station, which is, in my opinion, the most beautiful train station in Japan. This train station is a very famous photo spot because it looks like it's kind of built on an island with kind of the 2 bridges connecting to it, where the train runs on. It's a really interesting and unique train station, and probably the most beautiful place that I've seen in Japan during my time there. Again, here you can get a special pass which costs 4,200 yen, which is around $40. This makes it just cheaper than the ride between the first station and all the way to Oku Oikojo station. The train continues a little bit further, so if you take it even further, then it becomes even cheaper. But the ticket is also valid for 2 days. There's some onsen, there's some ryokan, so if you want to stay overnight, that is also an option. This one is the last train ride that is very close to Tokyo, and that is the Izumi and Kominato line, which connect with each other and run across the Bozo Peninsula in Chiba Prefecture. These are trains that we rode during the last week in Japan, and there's going to be a more in-depth vlog about those, but I thought I'd share some footage already because they were really beautiful, and here you go. The Kominato line runs for 35 kilometers between Goi Station and Kazusa Nakano in Chiba Prefecture, where it then connects to the Izumi line, which runs all the way to Ohara Station, which is kind of a beach town in eastern Chiba Prefecture. The trains themselves are really small and they look very cute, but the main reason why you want to get on this train is because of the scenery that you can get all around. Especially in spring, if you go, there are a lot of rape flower fields and also a lot of sakuras, which is just around the time that we were there. So you got this really beautiful train in red, contrasting with the pink of the sakura and also the yellow of the rape flowers. Just some really beautiful scenery all around. In summer there are also special trains that are kind of open, so you can feel the breeze coming in, which is really nice to cool off during the really sweltering heat that you have often in Japan during summer. And yeah, the trains both run kind of through very countryside-y areas, so you have a lot of rice fields. It's kind of plain, there's not a lot of mountains or anything, but it is kind of really rural, and it kind of has just this really nice rural Japanese vibe that you don't often see otherwise in trains. As with the other trains, there is a pass to make the rides cheaper. If you want, you can get at Goi Station a one-day pass for the Kominato Railway for around 1,800 yen, $18, and you can again get off and on as many times as you want. There is a pass for the Izumi line, but I wasn't really sure how to get that one. But you can also just get single tickets, essentially. One station that is really worth checking out if you are specifically there in spring, I would say, is Itabu Station, which is just a few stops before the terminal of the Kominato Railway. And the reason why you want to check it out is because they have these really beautiful sakura trees right next to the station. And in front of the station, they also have this kind of like pond, I guess. Maybe it's a rice field, I'm not sure, but it's kind of filled with water. And they also illuminate the sakura tree. So if you go there during night, after sunset I would recommend, then you can really see beautifully the sakura trees illuminated, reflected in the water with the train station, and when a train passes through. It's just a really beautiful scenery. I can show you a picture that I took over there, fortunately not with this camera but with a smaller one, but it still came out really beautifully. There are a lot of photographers taking pictures there. So yeah, that's a really beautiful stop. But again, otherwise the main reason why you would want to get on this train is because of the scenic rides that you can get across the Chiba Prefecture, essentially. So these ones are a little bit different because the first 3 trains that I mentioned are more or less touristy trains. I guess the Enoden train is also for people who live in the area, but for the biggest part those are trains that are more geared towards tourists. This one on the other hand is a train line that is more geared towards just normal people, but it was still really beautiful nevertheless, so I thought I'd put it on the list. First up, the Yamama Line. This one runs between Morioka City and Miyako City in Iwate Prefecture in northern Japan. And I wasn't really expecting a lot or anything from this train. I basically just took it because I needed to go from A to B. But it was really beautiful because it kind of passes through this deep valley. And if you go there in winter, it was really interesting because you'd start at really deep snow valleys, and then as you would kind of pass across a mountain, it would just open up and you would get a lot of interesting scenery with much less snow. It was kind of interesting seeing this kind of contrast from inner country Japan to like oceanside Japan. You get some really amazing views out on the valleys. You can get some really rural Japan views that I haven't really seen in that way in any other part or in any other train ride in Japan. Now once you get to Miyako City, this is a city that is nice, but it also bears a little bit of a sad history because this city was heavily hit during the tsunami around 10 years ago. You can actually see a lot of the signs of the destruction still there. You can also see the really big seawalls that they are building in the city. From Miyako City, you can continue on the Sanriku Railway, which is what we did, which is kind of this interesting railway that runs along the Sanriku coast. The Sanriku coast was again a coastline that was very heavily hit during the tsunami, And as you are passing through the area, you can kind of still see a lot of the destruction. You can see entirely flat land where there used to be houses. You can see all of the seawalls being built, but you can also see some really interesting scenery. You can see the ocean in a lot of parts. Fortunately, a lot of the ocean parts are blocked with the seawalls that they are building, but obviously you can still see a lot of interesting scenery. And it is kind of a more or less maybe a historical ride, if you want to see it that way, of the history of the tsunami and kind of seeing the destruction that it can cause. Now, putting this last one on the list kind of feels a little bit like cheating, because a lot of people might be familiar with the Choo line as a kind of an inner city train in Tokyo. If you ever been there, it's the yellow line or the orange line or the JR trains. However, what most people don't know is that the Choo line actually runs all the way from Tokyo to Nagoya. So it's a little bit of a 400-kilometer long ride, which is pretty long. And obviously it is a very scenic ride, because if you take it all the way, you can see almost the entire main island, or at least the central part of the main island of Japan, which has obviously a lot of interesting scenery. The entire journey is essentially broken down into sections, the first section being from Tokyo to Takao. Then you can take the train from Takao to Shiojiri, then from Shiojiri to Nakatsugawa, and then finally from Nakatsugawa all the way to Nagoya. So you will have to transfer a couple of times, but you can still do the entire journey. If you want to do it, you can do it on the Youth 18 ticket, which is a video that I'm going to release a little bit later, maybe in 1 or 2 months, but it's essentially a all-you-can-ride ticket for 2,500 yen, which is really cheap. And again, you will be passing through a lot of interesting areas that most foreigners, and I think a lot of Japanese people, never get to witness, because they want to get from Tokyo to Nagoya. They will get on the Shinkansen, which takes them there in 2 hours, but they will not be able to see the really inner country local routes that this train line runs. So those were the 5 most interesting train rides that I had the pleasure of riding in Japan. Did you guys take any of those? And if not, which one would you think would be the most beautiful to take out of the 5 that I mentioned? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you liked today's video, please hit the like button, please subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you in the next one. Choo choo! Good night.